Hello and welcome back. This is Cheryl. I'm so glad you're here today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this beautiful feather card. I just got the Sizzix Feathery die in, and I just got a set of magicals. The set of magicals that I'll be using is called Mad Hatter, and the colors I'm using is Mad Hatter, which is the green, and Teapot, which is the purple. I'm also using watercolor paper as a base, and I'm going to use a distress sprayer to spray underneath my piece of watercolor paper before I spray on top of it. This helps it to stop from warping while I am working on it. If you don't spray underneath it and kind of hold it to your surface, it is going to warp and your colors are going to flow to the edge. One thing I love about these magicals is that they have different colors in them, and they kind of explode like fireworks as you're dropping them on the surface. So the thing that I'm dropping them with is actually an old Slurpee straw that I just cut shorter. I find it really handy for things like this. Once I have the magicals on there, I am going to spray with some more water, and then I'm just using a watercolor brush, and I'm going to break up some of the clumps that happen. I haven't yet figured out how to avoid those clumps, so rather than having them on my finished surface, I'm just using the watercolor brush to break them up. So I'm doing one color first, and then I'm going to do the other color. That way I'm not creating a bunch of mud. I'm also using that brush to kind of push some of the colors into some of the white spaces so that I have a fully covered background when I'm done. Once this is completely done, you need to set it aside for quite a while for it to completely dry. While we're waiting for the magical background to completely dry, I'm going to start work on the rest of my card. I've got my pieces already pre-cut. I am using a ledger script to create the texture on the background of the card. And you saw me just put some adhesive on the back, and what I'm doing is I'm placing my piece of paper on the stamp, and then I'm going to close my stamp positioner so that the paper is exactly where I want it to be. Now you may see some ink on the paper already, and that's because the stamp that I was using was just used to make my sample, and I hadn't cleaned it in between. So it's going to stamp in the same spot, so it's perfect. So I'm using old paper distress ink to stamp this. I didn't want a color that was going to stand out a lot. I just wanted to add a little bit of texture to the background so it had a little bit more interest and wasn't quite as plain. And then I'm using a jumbo dauber with that same old paper ink, and I'm going to ink around the edges just to kind of frame it a little bit. So I typically start by holding my paper and just inking the edges just to get a darker edge on it. And once I've done all 4 edges of the paper, I'm going to put it down on my surface, and then I'm just going to use a circular motion starting off of the paper and working its way onto it to just bring that color a little bit more into my paper piece. This will be a little bit softer than than using the edge while I'm holding it in the air. Now I'm going to use my stamp positioner again, and I'm going to stamp the "Don't Forget to Fly" sentiment in there. So I'm going to put my piece of paper that I just did my background on, and then I'm going to position the stamp exactly where I want it to be, and then close the front of my stamp positioner. Then I will use Peacock Feathers Distress ink and ink the stamp. If by chance you see that you've gotten ink around the edges of the stamp, make sure to wipe it off, because otherwise you may accidentally stamp that on your surface. Much safer to wipe it off first, and that way you can prevent that from happening. The great thing about a stamp positioner is if by chance you don't stamp it perfectly the first time, you can re-ink your stamp and then stamp it again. Just gives a little bit of insurance to know that you're going to have a chance to do it a second time. So I'm going to put the background of my card together. I chose a purple matte to coordinate with the purple from the magicals, and then I'm going to glue on the image piece that we just created. So I'm using Distress Collage Medium to glue it in place. What I like about Distress Collage Medium is if by chance you have a little bit of glue seeping out, it dries completely matte and it dries completely clear, so you don't see where that glue might be if that happens. So our card front is completely done. I'm going to set that aside while waiting for the part that we're going to die cut the feather out of to dry. So my Magicals background is completely dry. The Feathery die cut set comes with 6 different dies. You're going to pick whichever is your favorite, and my favorite happened to just be the first one to come out. Typically what I'll do is I'll cut several at once just to utilize the most out of the background. For this one, I'm just cutting where I want it to be. I can use the rest of that background later for other die cuts or to cut more feathers. I place it so the paper is on top of my die. My die is with the blade facing up, and then run it through my Big Shot machine. I typically run it back and forth just so that the die has pressure from both ends running through. Take your die cut out of the paper and out of the die. I'm not sure if it's visible on the camera, but the Magicals have a really pretty shimmery effect to them. So this feather has some shimmer to it. Now I want to add a little bit of depth to it, so I'm taking that same Peacock Feathers Distress ink and I'm inking around the greeny areas, and then I'm going to take some Wilted Violet Distress ink and I'm going to ink around the purple areas. I didn't need to use both of these colors for the background. I just really liked how they looked together and how they blended together. Once I have the edges inked with both of the colors, I'm going to take that feather die and I'm going to use my fingers to just shape it a little bit. You could glue this feather onto the background of the card flat, but I thought by shaping it a bit, it just gave it a little bit more of a natural look and a little bit, just looked a little bit more interesting on the front of the card. So you can see there how I shaped it. Once it's shaped, I'm just going to put a little bit of Distress Collage Medium on the parts that are going to touch the surface of the card. If you wanted, you could also put some foam dots between the raised areas, but I don't plan to send this out in the mail for it to get squished, so I didn't think it was necessary for this particular sample, but you definitely could add some foam tape underneath it. I'm just going to hold it in place for a second while it dries, and that there is the finished sample. I love how it looks, and I love the simplicity of the feather. Those Magicals on there are really like magic. So these are the 2 cards, the first one I showed you at the beginning and then the one that we just created in this video. Thank you so much for joining me. Please hit subscribe on your way out. Have a great day.